The sun was merciless that afternoon, high and white and vibrating against the empty stretch of Arizona highway. The asphalt shimmered like it was alive. In the distance, dust swirled behind the van like a ghost following too close. Linda Walker pressed her forehead to the passenger window, eyes half closed, counting the mile markers. David drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, humming to some low tune on the radio. It wasn't music, not really, just static bleeding into the voice of a preacher or a country singer. She couldn't tell which. In the back, Hannah and Evan were quiet, finally asleep after a long morning of fighting over cassette tapes and soda. Hannah's Walkman still buzzed faintly. They had been driving for 6 hours, and no one had spoken. In the last 40 minutes, Linda opened the glove compartment and pulled out her small leather notebook, the one she never let David see. It fit in the palm of her hand like a prayer book. But its contents were anything but holy. July 15th, 1995. Still, Arizona. Still pretending. David hasn't looked me in the eye since Flagstaff. I don't know what's scarier, the silence or the fact that it feels like a relief. I think Hannah knows something's off. She watches me when she thinks I'm not looking. Evan just wants ice cream. This trip was supposed to fix things. But maybe I never wanted to fix it at all. She closed the notebook when David cleared his throat. We're low on gas, he said. Next stop we pull over. She nodded. It was always easier not to speak. They exited off a narrow ramp leading into what looked like nothing, a half-mile of cracked road, a rusted fence and a leaning sign that simply read, food, gas, open, no brand name. Just promise. The gas station was the only structure for miles. A solitary building with peeling white paint, 2 old pumps out front, and a row of vending machines buzzing in the heat. A buzzard circled overhead. The place looked like it had given up 10 years ago. David got out first, stretching. Kids, wake up, he called over his shoulder. Linda opened the door slowly, stepping into the dry heat like she was stepping into someone else's life. She walked to the vending machine and bought a lukewarm soda. The can hissed in her hand. She didn't drink it. Inside. The station was dim and quiet, air heavy with motor oil and something metallic. Evan tugged at her shirt. Can I get candy? Ask your dad. David was at the counter, talking to the clerk. The man behind the register looked ancient, with skin like cracked leather and a cigarette clinging to his lip. He barely glanced. Up. Linda wandered toward the magazine rack. Dusty tabloid covers stared back at her. Alien abductions, missing brides, devil babies born in Ohio. She picked one up, flipped the pages, not reading. Then she felt it, that prickle on the back of her neck. Someone watching. She turned. Near the side window stood a man, not the clerk, younger, late 30s maybe, with long sun-fried hair and a tattered army jacket. He leaned against the drink cooler, pretending to study the labels, but his eyes were on her. Not hungry, not angry, just there, unblinking. Linda lowered her gaze, pretending not to notice. She suddenly felt exposed in her shorts and tank top, like she'd stepped into a story where she didn't know her role. Let's go, David called. Gas is done. Outside, the kids were climbing into the van. Linda hesitated before stepping back into the heat. She looked one last time over her shoulder. The strange man had moved to the window now. Inside the building, watching them through the glass. She didn't mention him to David. She didn't know why. They drove off in silence. Gravel crunching under the tires until it gave way to pavement again. David's hand returned to the steering wheel. Firm and focused, 15 minutes passed. We'll take the scenic road through Pima Cliffs, he said, glancing at the map folded on his lap. Should shave an hour. Linda blinked. That's more remote, isn't it? Less traffic. She looked in the side mirror. The gas station had disappeared into the dust, swallowed whole by the landscape. Hannah leaned forward between the seats. Are we stopping anywhere cool? There's a lookout point, David said. Big drop, real pretty. Can we take pictures? Sure, he said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Linda turned to the window again. The desert stretched endlessly, rolling hills of scrub and rock and bone-dry silence. Somewhere in her chest, something felt like it had just shut tight. She opened her notebook again. We just passed mile marker 232. I don't know why. I wrote that down. Maybe it's because if something happens, someone should know where we were. The desert gave nothing back. 3 days after the walkers were last seen, their van was found abandoned, alone, still, and scorched under the Arizona sun. It sat at the end of a dirt road that didn't appear on any map. Not quite a trail, not quite a path, just a stretch of land beaten into submission by weather and time. Mile marker 233 was just visible in the distance. Sheriff Clay Morris stood beside the van, one hand on his hip, the other shading his eyes. The engine was stone cold. No footprints in the dust, no broken glass, no blood. Just a locked vehicle parked with eerie neatness on a nowhere road. Doors sealed, windows intact. Inside, 2 soda cans, half-melted crayons, a family map of Arizona. With a blue line traced across it, ending here. The tires aren't slashed. Deputy Miller said, crouching by the front left wheel. No signs of forced entry, nothing mechanical, Morris grunted. They didn't break down. They stopped here on purpose. Then where'd they go? That was the question everyone would ask for years. By sundown, search teams were combing the surrounding land. Dogs, ATVs, choppers, thermal drones. Volunteers poured in from the nearby towns of Ash Creek and Rolling Mesa, the local news. Stations showed aerial shots of flashlights sweeping through the brush like fireflies. Nothing. No torn fabric. No blood trail. Not even a dropped shoe. As the desert swallowed the second night, the heat began to give way to unease. Karen Hartley had never liked the desert. It made her feel watched. When the call came, 3 days after Linda stopped returning messages, she didn't cry. She packed a bag, got in her car, and drove straight from Tempe to the sheriff's office without sleeping. My sister is not irresponsible, she said, her voice low but steady. She wouldn't just vanish with 2 children. Sheriff Morris. Look tired already. We're treating this as a missing persons case. Full protocol. Karen leaned forward. And David? What about him? They're all missing. She didn't like how he said it, flat, impersonal, as if listing names off a grocery receipt. But she could read what was behind it. Suspicion. David's name sat heavy on their tongues. The husband, the father, the one who'd driven. They weren't unhappy, she offered. I mean, died maybe not perfect. But Linda never said she was scared of him. That was true. She never said it. But Karen remembered the last time she saw her sister in person, 6 weeks ago. At a coffee shop, Linda had shown up late, wearing sunglasses indoors. When Karen asked if everything was okay, Linda smiled too quickly and said, of course, just tired. Now that smile haunted her. By day 5, the media was on it. Headlines bloomed across the state. Family of 4 vanishes without a trace. Arizona desert swallows tourists. Again? Was it an accident? Or something worse? Karen hated them all. Reporters hovered outside the sheriff's department, sniffing for tragedy. One even followed her to the gas station. She slammed her door in his face. Inside the office, Sheriff Morris laid out the timeline. Surveillance footage at a rural gas stop confirmed their last sighting. The walkers had filled up, bought snacks, and left. A man in a camouflage jacket had been seen watching them. His name was unknown. His face was clear, but no one recognized him. Karen pointed at the printed still image from the tape. You think he followed them? We don't know, Morris said, but we want to find him. The image showed the man's profile, sharp nose, unshaven jaw, staring out the window as the walker's van pulled away. The van was found 30 miles south, 30 miles of open land, 30 miles and a missing mile between sightings, a terrain. Where people don't just disappear, they disintegrate. Karen went to the site herself. A deputy drove her out to the dirt road. The van was gone, towed to impound, but she stood where it had been, wind tugging at her jacket. The ground was undisturbed. Unscarred, too clean. She imagined Linda stepping out here. Hannah and Evan stretching their legs. David pointing at something in the distance. Or shouting, but she couldn't picture what came next, what made them leave. Or who, that night, back at the motel, Karen sat alone with her sister's photo. Linda was smiling, her eyes squinting into the sun, one arm slung casually around David's shoulders. In the picture. They looked happy, but photos lied. She picked up the phone and called her sister's voicemail again. It rang, then played Linda's cheerful recording. "Hey, it's Linda. Leave a message and I'll get back to you, unless I'm on the road again." Beep. Karen closed her eyes. "I don't know where you are, Lynn," she whispered, voice breaking for the first time. "But I don't believe you just walked off into the desert." She ended the call. Outside, sirens wailed faintly in the night. Somewhere nearby, the desert winds blew sand over tire tracks, covering them, erasing. The phone rang. She jumped. But it wasn't Linda. It was the sheriff's office. "We might have found something," the voice said. Karen's breath caught. "What is it?" A pause. Papers rustling. "There's a discrepancy in the autopsy logs, but we'll need to speak in person." They met in the diner off Route 6, the kind with cracked leather booths and a jukebox that hadn't played since the 80s. It was just past 7 p.m. And the waitress had stopped pretending to smile. Karen stirred her coffee without drinking it. Across from her sat Mark Tillman, sleeves rolled up, fingers stained with ink and grease. David's old co-worker from Delmer Engineering, not a close friend, but close enough to know things David hadn't said out loud. He was always quiet, Mark said. But near the end, he started acting weird. Karen watched him closely. "Weird how?" Mark tapped a sugar packet on the table. "He'd stay after hours alone, lock his office. Sometimes I'd hear him arguing, but no one was there." On the phone? No, out loud, like arguing with a memory. Karen looked down at her notebook. "Linda told me something similar. She said he wasn't sleeping, disappearing at night." Mark nodded. "Yeah, he was jumpy, suspicious, asked me once if I thought people could follow you without moving. I didn't know what he meant." Karen hesitated. "Do you think he was dangerous?" Mark leaned back. "Not dangerous, but haunted." That word, haunted, clung to her as she drove back to the motel. In the silence, she let herself replay the last real conversation she had with Linda. It was late June, a week before the trip. They were sitting on Karen's porch, kids playing inside. The sun had dipped below the trees. Linda held her wine glass too tight. "He's not the same anymore," she had whispered. Karen frowned. "You mean David? He doesn't talk. Or when he does, it's coded, like he's hiding behind riddles." Karen waited. Linda leaned closer. "He accused me of cheating. Said he knows about the letters. I never wrote anything." Karen raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" Linda paused. "Okay, maybe one, but not what he thinks. It wasn't about an affair." That night, Linda had looked over her shoulder. 3 times, twice for nothing. Once because Hannah had crept up behind her. It was only now, weeks later, and with Linda missing, that Karen realized what she was seeing that night wasn't fear. It was resignation. The sheriff's office had pulled David's personnel files. Clean record, no HR issues. But there were 2 months unaccounted for, a medical leave without any medical documentation. Karen called the office manager. "Yes," the woman said. "David took time off last fall. Said it was for family." But Linda came in once looking confused. Said she didn't know anything about it. "Do you know where he went?" "No, but when he came back, he looked tired. Like he'd been running from something." That phrase again. Running. But from what? Flashback, 6 months earlier, the Walker home, night. Linda sits on the couch, staring at the muted television. David enters from the back door quietly. He smells of cigarettes. His eyes are wide, distracted. "You said you were working late," she says without looking at him. "I was. I called the office. You weren't there." David stiffens. "You spying on me now?" "No, just trying to understand. I went for a drive, needed air. You've been gone 4 hours. He shrugs, sits across from her. Silence stretches between them like a chasm. Then he says something strange. "Do you ever feel like someone is watching us, even when we're alone?" Linda finally looks at him. "David," he doesn't blink. "Sometimes I think I see things just in the corner of my vision. Then they're gone. She doesn't answer. Doesn't know how dot, so she just says, I booked the road trip. He nods slowly. We need it, she adds. But neither of them sounds convinced, back in the present. Karen flips through Linda's notebook. Dates, scribbled observations. Fragments of emotion. David hasn't slept through the night since October. He sits on the porch and watches the trees. Says nothing. Sometimes he talks in his sleep. Names I don't recognize. There's something he's not telling me. And I think it's going to break us. Karen closes the book. Heart pounding. The road trip hadn't been a vacation. It was a lifeline or a final attempt that evening. A second interview transcript arrived at the sheriff's office. A hiker who had passed through Pima Cliffs around the time of the walker's disappearance. He hadn't seen the family, but he had seen a man camping alone near the rocks, twitchy, unkempt. Said his name was Daniel. Or maybe Darren. The man said he was waiting for someone, but when the hiker passed by 2 hours later, the man and his tent were gone. Karen stared at the report. Waiting for someone, like a meeting or an ambush. The Pima. Cliffs didn't welcome visitors, a tangle of sheer rock faces. Snake-thin trails and dead-end washes carved by centuries of wind and flood. The area had long been avoided by locals who believed the land remembered everything, even what people tried to forget. 3 days into the search, a chopper hovered over the cliffs at dawn, casting long shadows into the canyons below. From the air, the terrain looked like a broken jawbone, jagged, hollow, dangerous on the ground. The teams were exhausted. We've cleared nearly 30 square miles. Sheriff Morris told the press, his eyes bloodshot. No signs of the walkers. We're expanding west. Karen stood off to the side, arms crossed tightly over her chest. She hadn't slept. She hadn't cried either. Not since the call. Each hour that passed without a lead felt like the sun pressing heavier against her chest. Still, she stayed. She couldn't explain it, but something told her the answers weren't far. They were here, buried somewhere beneath dust and silence. It was on the 6th day that Thomas Yazzie stepped forward, a Navajo park ranger with 20 years of experience patrolling the cliffs. Yazzie had only heard about the missing family after. A fellow ranger mentioned the media buzz. He reported to the sheriff's office late that afternoon. I saw the van, Yazzie said plainly. 4 days ago, right at the edge of the cliffs? Sheriff Morris leaned forward. You sure it was the same one? Blue Chrysler Voyager, Arizona plates? Had a sticker in the back window, something purple. Karen froze. That was Hannah's school logo. Where were they? The sheriff asked. That's the thing, Yazzie replied. There was no one around. Van looked parked, not abandoned. I didn't think much of it at the time. Any sign of people nearby? Campfire? Trash? Yazzie shook his head. Nothing. No movement. No tracks, just the van. The next day it was gone. And you didn't report it? Yazzie's jaw tightened. I see a lot of odd things out here. People come and go. Camp illegally. Get spooked. I didn't think it was connected to anything. Karen's voice was quieter. You ever get the feeling someone was watching you? He hesitated. Out there? All the time. Word spread fast. Locals from nearby towns began to share stories, all different in detail, but all circling the same stretch of road near the cliffs. A place some called the Ditch. A trucker claimed his radio went dead every time he passed it. An old woman said her dog refused to cross a certain bend in the canyon trail. Someone else. A teenage hiker said he'd seen shadows flicker in the rocks where there was no sun. Ghost. Stories, maybe, but in the absence of facts. Folklore filled the silence. Karen returned to the cliffs with a search team and stood at the very edge. Where the ranger said the van had been, beneath her the canyon dropped sharply, a dry ravine. Littered with sun-bleached rock, patches of brush, and the occasional glint of shattered glass. The air here was different, heavier. Still, she tried to picture Linda standing there. What had they seen? What had they heard? Or maybe who? The wind shifted, and with it came the faintest sound or memory of sound, like a voice in a dream. A child's voice. She turned, but there was nothing, only open air and rocks that never answered back. After 2 weeks, the official search was scaled back. Sheriff Morris called a press conference. His shirt was freshly ironed, but his face looked Older. As of today, we are suspending active field operations in the Walker case, he said. All leads have been exhausted. The case remains open, but at this time, we have no further updates. Reporters pressed for answers. Was this a kidnapping? Were there signs of foul play? Is the family presumed dead? Morris gave the same response each time. We're still investigating. Karen stood in the back, watching the cameras. Flash dot in her hand, she held Linda's old notebook, dog-eared now, pages curled with sweat and dust. She reread one line over and over again. If something happens, someone should know where we were. She closed it, but no one knew. And soon, no one would care. By August, the news moved on. A wildfire north of Prescott. A celebrity overdose in another election cycle starting early. The Walkers became a name on a poster, a pin on a map. A warning story whispered by travelers and hikers. Don't go off-road past. Pima Cliffs, don't drive at dusk. Don't stop if you see a van parked. Alone, the desert had won. Another mystery lost in the folds of its silence. The desert hadn't changed. It still breathed in silence, still kept its secrets. Still waited for someone to look in the wrong direction and see something they weren't. Meant to. In the spring of 2005, Emily Ruiz had no idea she was about to disturb one of those secrets. She was a junior at Arizona State, majoring in environmental science, working on a drone mapping project for a field class. Her assignment was simple: capture aerial footage of unmarked geological formations near the Pima Cliffs. She was more interested in the topography than the legends. The Walkers were a story she'd only vaguely heard, something her uncle once mentioned over beers, half-drunkenly, like a campfire tale. They say the whole family just vanished, he'd said. Poof, gone, like they were eaten by the rocks. Emily had rolled her eyes, but now, as her drone hovered 500 feet above a jagged ledge, its camera panning the uneven terrain, she felt a flicker of something. Not fear? Not yet? Just ... wrongness? She squinted at the monitor. Something was down there, nestled against the base of a fractured slope where a partial rockslide had carved out a collapsed overhang. Not obvious, not visible from the road. Just barely peeking out, she zoomed in. At first, it looked like a rusted piece of farm equipment. Then the sun shifted. Metal glinted, unmistakably curved. Windows, frame, a van, covered in dust. Cracked. Windshield. Partially buried by earth and stone. Her heart skipped. She brought the drone closer. There, faded blue paint. Rear bumper still intact. A school logo on the back window, bleached almost white. Just below it, scratched into the dirt-caked glass, were faint red letters, dried, weathered. But still there. Not all of us died here. The footage made it to the local sheriff's department by the next morning. Within hours, they confirmed the match. Arizona plates. 1993 Chrysler Voyager. Partial VIN found on the rusted frame. The Walker van. 10 years after they vanished. It had been there all along. Just out of sight. Hidden in a crevice no one thought to check. Sheriff Clay Morris, now retired, was called in to consult. When he saw the drone footage, he didn't speak for a full minute. It was always the cliffs, he muttered, mostly too. Himself, the recovery took 2 days. Excavation crews carefully cleared the collapsed rocks. Heat pressed down like a weight. Dust filled the air. Everything moved slowly. The van's interior was sun-bleached, brittle and skeletal on the driver's side, bones, consistent with a male adult. In the passenger seat, more remains, smaller. Female, in the back seat, bones of a child. They were confirmed to be David Linda. And Evan Walker, the fourth seat, was empty. There was no trace of Hannah. And that wasn't all. Under a collapsed section of the roof, half buried beneath shattered glass and fragments of the van's frame. Forensic teams found a fifth body, adult, male, not part of the family. Unidentified. Karen Hartley, now 42, received the call on a Monday afternoon. When she heard the name Walker, her legs gave out. She flew in from Santa Fe the next day. Standing at the edge of the dig site, she stared down at the warped skeleton of the van. It looked smaller than she remembered, fragile, like something made of paper and time, the red writing on the rear. Window had faded to a faint brown. Dried blood, the coroner confirmed. Someone, likely Linda, had written it from inside. Not all of us died here. Karen couldn't stop staring at those words. A message, a witness, a warning: die Friday. The media had returned. Vanished family's vehicle found after 10 years. Mystery deepens with fifth body discovered. Message in blood sparks new. Investigation. Karen watched the headlines unfold with numb detachment. The story had become a spectacle. Again, reporters camped out in town, drone footage looped on TV, speculations thrown out like chum in shark-infested water, but all she could think about was Hannah. Where was she? And more disturbingly, why wasn't she in that van? That night, she met with the new lead investigator, Detective Reed Salgado, mid-30s, efficient, no nonsense. He handed her a sealed evidence bag. Inside it, a child's bracelet, purple and yellow beads, faded, elastic nearly snapped. Hannah's? He asked. Karen nodded slowly. I helped her make it the summer before. Found under the passenger seat, Reed said. Along with a torn corner of a notebook page. You recognize the handwriting? Karen took a breath. Yes, that's Linda's. The fragment read, he wasn't supposed to be here. David said no one else was coming. Karen closed her eyes. So someone else had joined them, someone unexpected. Later that night, alone in her motel room, Karen stared out the window at the distant shadow of the cliffs. She thought about Linda's voice, Evan's laugh, David's stare, and Hannah, 12 years old, bright, clever, already asking questions the world didn't want to answer. She whispered into the silence, please, let her still be out there. Somewhere in the distance, a train moaned through the dark. The desert, as always, said nothing. Karen didn't sleep that night. She stared at the motel ceiling for hours, going over the names, the bones, the blood. The numbers didn't lie, but they didn't explain anything either. 4 walkers went missing. Only 3 came back, and 1 stranger. When morning broke, she was already dressed, sitting outside the sheriff's office with a paper coffee cup trembling in her hand. The desert sun hadn't yet reached its full cruelty, but the weight of the unknown pressed heavier than heat. Detective Reed Salgado met her at the door. We've got the preliminary forensic report, he said, holding a folder. She braced herself. 3 of the remains matched the walkers, he continued. David, Linda, and Evan, dental and mitochondrial DNA confirm it, but... He paused. Karen finished the sentence for him. No Hannah, Reed nodded. There's no sign of her remains. No clothing, no shoes. Nothing indicating a 4th child-sized body was ever in that cave. Karen gripped the armrest of the metal chair. What about the 5th skeleton? Reed opened the folder. Male, adult, mid to late 30s. He wasn't buried, just wedged between the collapsed wall and rear of the van. No ID, no wallet. A broken jaw and 2 healed rib fractures suggest he'd suffered injuries before he died, possibly from a fight. Karen's voice barely rose above a whisper. So who was he? Reed didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his satchel and pulled out a photo in a sealed sleeve. This was found in the lining of Linda's duffel bag. It's been water damaged, but we're trying to restore the rest of it. The photo was faded, but Karen recognized it instantly. Linda, standing beside a tall man in a baseball cap. They were laughing, arms touching. Karen inhaled sharply. That's not David. No, Reed said. We don't think it is. Back at her home in Santa Fe, Karen dug through the old cedar chest she had once promised herself she'd never open again. Inside was a shoebox, wrapped in twine. Letters yellowed with time, folded and refolded until the creases were permanent. Linda's handwriting was unmistakable. Karen sat on the floor, spreading them out around her like fragile evidence. Most were dated between 1991 and 1993. Most were addressed to her musings, complaints, confessions. But then she found it in envelope sealed only with a single strip of tape. No address, no stamp, only a name written on the back. S. She opened it carefully. I don't know what. This is becoming, you say it's a spark, but I see wildfire. And wildfire destroys everything in its path. David suspects something. He's watching me closer than ever. That's why we're going on this trip, to fix us. he says, but S, if I don't come back, please don't let it have been for nothing. I'm not stupid. I know what we did. And I know what he's capable of. No date, no last name. Just S. Karen stared at the letter until her eyes burned. Had Linda been planning to leave David? Had she invited someone to the trip? Was that fifth body S? Detective Salgado met Karen again later that week, this time in a quiet corner of a Phoenix archives office. The investigation had officially reopened. Old files were being pulled from storage, phone logs, witness interviews, credit card transactions. We think Linda had a second cell phone, Reed said. We were combing through tower pings near the trailhead that week. There's a number she texted several times in the days leading up to the trip. It was registered to a prepaid under the name Sam O'Hara. Karen froze. That name, she'd heard it once in 1992 in a moment of anger. Linda had whispered it on the phone, not knowing Karen had picked up the other line. Sam doesn't make me feel small, she'd said. Sam O'Hara had worked with Linda at the Flagstaff Tourism Board in 91, quiet, outdoorsy. Divorce, she disappeared in late 1993. 2 weeks after the Walkers were reported missing. No missing persons report was ever filed. Until now, forensics confirmed it. 3 days later, the fifth body belonged to Sam O'Hara, the man who was never supposed to be on that trip, the man David had never agreed to bring, the man Linda had loved. Reed spread the crime scene. Reconstruction photos across the table. Here's what we think happened, he said. David found out. Sam showed up at the trailhead anyway. A fight broke out. Something went wrong. The van ends up buried. But Karen leaned forward. But what? Reed pointed to the rear window. Someone survived. Someone wrote that message. Linda? Karen asked. Reed shook his head. Too much damage to her hands. Forensic markers suggest the message was written after the van had collapsed. After she was already dead? Karen's blood ran cold. That left one possibility, Hannah. She could have escaped, Karen whispered later, standing at the cave's edge again. Maybe she ran? Maybe someone helped her. Reed joined her. If she did, we have no record of her after 93, no school, no ID, no medical visits. Karen's voice wavered. Unless someone made sure she stayed hidden. Far away, in a dusty records room beneath a county hospital, an old nurse clocked out for the last time. She paused by a locked filing cabinet. Inside, an admission form dated November 12, 1993. No. Last name. Just the note scribbled in the margin. Child found wandering alone. Won't speak. Answers only to Hannah. Karen sat cross-legged on the rug, sunlight crawling in slow, slanted lines across the room. The box of Linda's letters lay open beside her like a wound she hadn't dared touch in years. But now, with a stranger's body found in the cave, Sam O'Hara and Hannah still missing, the silence of the past no longer felt like protection. It felt like complicity. She picked up the first letter marked S. The handwriting was slanted, rushed. Less polished than the ones Linda had sent Karen. These were never mailed, only written, then folded away. A secret record. A confession. I saw you at the cafe today. Just seeing you made everything worse and better. I don't know how to explain that. I feel like I'm walking a knife's edge. David's been quiet lately, that kind of quiet that hums under the surface. He's pretending I am too. The next few letters grew darker. I told you I'd come that night, but I couldn't. Evan had a fever. David was drinking. I couldn't risk it. But I dreamed of you. I dream of that summer when we were 17. You wore that ridiculous bandana and promised to take me to New Mexico on the back of your bike. God, we were reckless. Karen stopped. 17? This wasn't Sam O'Hara. The name signed at the bottom of the letter wasn't. It was Stephen, a new name. A new past. Karen's hands trembled as she spread out more pages. Some were dated months before the trip. Others had no date at all, just desperate language. Fragments of a woman unraveling inside a marriage that had turned into a shadow of itself. Stephen, you asked why I didn't just leave? I don't think you understand what David becomes. When he thinks he's losing something, he doesn't hit me. Not like that, but he controls everything, every dollar, every minute. The kids adore him, or maybe they're just scared like I am. Maybe that's the same thing, I don't know anymore. Another letter, more hurried. He found my journal. I think he read parts of it. He hasn't said anything, but he's colder. There's this silence between us now, thick as fog. He planned this road trip out of nowhere. Said we needed to get away and start fresh. He's picking the route. No motels, just wilderness. I can't tell if this is a peace offering or a goodbye. Karen swallowed hard. Had the road trip been a trap? Had David planned it too? Isolate them? Had Linda walked willingly into something she thought was a chance for freedom, only to find she'd been led straight into a cage? One letter stood out from the rest. It was different, longer, folded in quarters like it had been opened and reread many times. Karen read it slowly. Stephen, I won't get another chance to write before we leave. We head out in 2 days. I've packed what I can without him. Noticing, the kids know we're going on an adventure. I haven't told them anything else. I want to tell them we might not come back to this house, that we might finally have a life without the tension, the fear. But I'm scared of what I'll have to do to make that true, if anything happens, if I go quiet. Promise me you won't. Believe the first story you hear. Promise me you'll look deeper, that someone will. She had signed it with just a heart and her name. Linda. Karen exhaled shakily. The pieces were rearranging themselves. It wasn't just Sam. Linda had reconnected with Stephen, someone from her youth. Sam O'Hara might have been a red herring. Or worse, someone caught in the middle. Perhaps even a hired guide or friend pulled into chaos he didn't understand. But the central question now glared brighter than ever. Did David know? And if he did, how far would he go? Karen returned to the forensics report. David's body had been found near the front passenger seat, glass embedded in his temple, Linda's bones were closer to the van's rear. Avens, heartbreakingly, had been cradled under a blanket. Sam, or maybe Stephen, had been wedged into the collapsed side of the cave, but something about that configuration was off. Too deliberate. As if someone had moved them. Staged them, or survived long enough to try, she called Detective Salgado. There's a possibility the fifth man wasn't Sam, she said. I found letters from someone named Stephen. Linda knew him before David. I think he came back into her life months before the trip. Reed was quiet. Then, we'll need DNA confirmation. I know, Karen said. But if it's him? If Stephen was the fifth body, then who the hell was Sam? Reed hesitated. We may be chasing the wrong ghost. That night, Karen couldn't sleep again. The letters sat beside her on the table, illuminated by lamplight. Linda's voice echoed through them, vulnerable, hopeful, terrified. Karen whispered into the silence, as if her friend could hear her across time. I believe you now. Outside, the wind shifted, and somewhere tucked inside a manila envelope, marked unsolved, a fingerprint scan pinged a partial match, the name blinking beside it. Stephen Markham dealt the bones didn't lie. The forensic report was crisp, cold, sterile black ink against government stationery. But beneath the surface, it throbbed with something raw. The fifth skeleton in the cave was not a stranger. It was Stephen R. Mallory, born 1963, died sometime between July 15th and July 21st, 1995. Karen stared at the name. It hadn't meant much when she was younger. Linda had barely spoken about him. An old friend, she'd once said, a little too quickly, changing the subject. But now, those folded letters, yellowed and shaking in her hand, read like warning signs missed on a dark highway. Stephen wasn't just a friend. He had been something more. Maybe too much more. The scene cuts to Linda's voice, quiet, tired. Her diary entries echo across time. I don't think David sleeps anymore. He paces the hallway. I feel him watching me when I pretend to dream. I know he's read at least one letter. He hasn't said anything, but I know. The flashback begins 5 days before the family vanished. The Walker van cruises through Highway 191, flanked by bleached canyons and crumbling asphalt. Inside, tension builds like heat trapped beneath the windshield. David's eyes don't blink often. His jaw clenches when Linda speaks. Evan hums in the back. Hannah is quiet, They make camp by the Pima Cliffs, a last-minute stop according to Linda, but it's not random. David insists on it. He says it's peaceful, isolated that night. Under stars drowned by heat lightning, Linda hears something, footsteps crunching. Not David. He's already standing outside the tent, motionless in the dark. A figure approaches from the scrub. Stephen. She stumbles out, eyes wide, stunned and terrified. What the hell are you doing here? I got your letter, Stephen. Whispers, you said you'd be here? No, I didn't mean now. I didn't think you'd actually... From behind her, David's voice cuts the silence. How long has this been going on? The confrontation is brutal, not in fists, but in words sharpened by betrayal. David's rage isn't loud, it's methodical. He doesn't scream, he just stares as though weighing each outcome. Linda tries to place herself between them, begging both men to calm down. I wrote him before I even planned this trip. She says, it wasn't supposed to be you wrote him while we shared a bed, Linda. David turns his gaze to Stephen. And you, Stephen steps forward. If you hurt her, I swear, wrong move. Back in 2005, investigators reconstruct the scene. Only one flashlight is found inside the van. A second lies crushed at the cave's edge, suggesting a scuffle in the dark. The bones don't offer. Answers, just fragments. Stephen's skull shows a hairline fracture. David's wrist was broken before death. Linda's ribs had partially healed breaks from weeks before the incident, and Evan, poor Evan, had no defensive wounds. He might have never known, but Hannah's bones were never there. Karen sits across from Detective Ramos, clutching a letter. It ends with a single, desperate sentence. If anything happens, I need you to know. I was going to leave him. Not run away, not steal the kids, just leave. That's all I ever wanted. The camera pans across Linda's old handwriting. As Karen whispers, he knew, he planned it all. Ramos looks up. Then Stephen showing up, that wasn't chance. It was bait, Karen closes her eyes, or a rescue. The drone footage is reviewed again, this time with new eyes. Investigators notice something they missed before, a small disturbance, barely visible, 200 feet uphill from the van, as if something or someone had climbed out and kept going. The question now wasn't just what happened, it was who walked away. And why? And Hannah, 12 years old, smart, quiet, always watching, had she seen everything? The voicemail wouldn't stop replaying in Karen's mind. She was with someone after. I saw them years ago, they were alive. The words had cracked. Opened something that had, for years, fossilized inside her, hope. Karen hadn't dared imagine that Hannah could still be alive. After everything they'd found in that cave, after the DNA confirmed Linda, David, Evan, and Stephen were all there, buried beneath time and silence. Hannah had felt like a ghost, but now the ghost had a whisper. A direction. The call came 2 days later from a woman named Lavra Green, a retired social worker now living outside Eugene, Oregon. I know this sounds insane, Lavra had said. But after hearing about the cave, the van, I think I knew her, years ago, a girl who called herself Anna L. Karen leaned into the phone, her pulse quickening. How old? She said 16. But we thought maybe younger. She had burns on her back and hands, didn't talk much. Wouldn't say where she came from, but there was something about her. Haunted, like she'd seen something no child should ever see. Karen booked the next flight out. The shelter was a long, 2-story building tucked between pine trees and rusted railroad tracks. It hadn't changed much since 1995. Karen walked its quiet hallways. Childhood photos of Hannah clutched in her bag like relics. Lavra met her in the staff lounge, holding a file thick with yellowed reports and folded drawings. She stayed. Here for 6 weeks? Never opened up. Barely ate. But she drew constantly. They spread the sketches on a table. Crayon landscapes at first, a lake, a van, canyons under a cracked moon. But then things got darker, a man with no eyes. A cave made of teeth. A girl standing alone with blood on her hands. Karen froze. That's Hannah's style. She always drew like this. Like her dreams had edges, Lavra nodded. One day she just vanished. Ran away with an older girl, runaway named Jess, said she couldn't stay. Said people were still watching the cliffs. I never saw her again. Do you have any idea where she might have gone? I might not, but Diane might. Diane was a former volunteer who had bonded with Anna L. during those quiet, shattered weeks. They met her at a small bakery on the outskirts of town. As soon as Karen pulled out a photo of Hannah at age 10, gap-toothed, curls wild, face smeared with ice cream, Diane covered her mouth and began to cry. "That's her," she whispered. "That's Anna." Karen sat in stunned silence. "She's alive?" She is. She has to be. She left with Jess, yeah, but she sent me a postcard 2 years later, no return address. Just a drawing of a canyon. Sighed. Still walking. Still here. Lavra looked at Karen. "Do you have any recent photos?" Karen shook her head. "No, that's the thing. She disappeared at 12. She'd be almost 30 now." Diane looked down, then slowly reached into her purse. "Then I think I saw her 2 weeks ago." "What?" "She came into the bakery, just stood there, didn't buy anything. Looked right at me, like she wanted to say something. Her face was different, older, tired, but the eyes were the same. Deep and distant. She left before I could speak." Karen gripped the table. "Where did she go?" "There's a small hiking trail by the old quarry. People sleep rough out there. If she's still hiding, it's where she'd be." Karen found the trail the next morning. Fog clung to the evergreens. Her shoes crunched against gravel and pine needles. She called Hannah's name once, softly, not expecting an answer. But somewhere deeper in the woods, a branch cracked out, then silence, then footsteps, a figure emerged, hooded, thin, with a duffel slung across her back. She paused when she saw Karen, her body tensed, as if ready to flee. Karen didn't move. She held out a photo instead, the one of Hannah and Evan in the front yard with bubble wands and sunshine, and whispered, "He missed you." The woman's shoulders slumped. The duffel dropped, and then she cried, wordless. Raw. It was her. Hannah. They sat beneath a mossy boulder. Hannah didn't speak for a long time. Her voice, when it came, was sandpaper. "I thought no one made it." Out. Karen blinked back tears. "We didn't know you did." "I ran, after the cave. I don't remember how far, just away." Karen took her hand. "You don't have to run anymore." But Hannah's eyes stayed fixed on the trees. "You think I left them?" "No." "You think I could have stopped it?" "No." Silence fell between them, thick as the forest. Then Hannah whispered, "I wasn't alone when I left." Karen turned slowly. "What do you mean?" "There was someone else, a man. He found me. Said he knew what happened. Sighed I had to disappear. Or they'd finish what they started." Karen froze. "Who was he?" Hannah looked up. "I don't know his name, but he had a badge." The forest around them was thick with the low hum of wind through pine needles and the distant call of a jay. Karen watched Hannah carefully, still trembling from their reunion, but this time from a different kind of fear, one rooted deep in years of silence. Hannah pulled her knees close to her chest. The duffel bag lay beside her, half forgotten. She swallowed, eyes fixed on the moss-covered roots. "I'm ready to tell you," she whispered, voice rough, "but I can only do it in pieces." Karen nodded gently. "Whatever you need." The fragments came slowly, like scattered puzzle pieces blown by the desert wind. David Walker had changed in the months before the trip. The man who once smiled with warmth at his children had become a shadow, silent, brooding, with a darkness lurking behind his eyes. He believed Linda was planning to leave him, taking the kids, and he wasn't going to let that happen. She dot. "She wasn't trying to run away," Hannah said, voice trembling. "Mom was scared, but she wasn't leaving without a fight." "The camping trip," she said, "wasn't a peaceful getaway. It was a trap." David insisted on the remote spot near the Pima Cliffs. Linda suspected something but hoped the trip would help. A last chance to patch things, to keep the family from breaking apart. Stephen arrived unexpectedly that night. Hannah remembered the way her mother's face softened, then tightened with fear. "It wasn't just a fight between two men," Hannah said. "It was a war," she shivered. "Dad and Stephen, they fought like wild animals." "They weren't Just angry, they were desperate. I remember Mom trying to stand between them, protect us. Her voice broke. She kept telling them to stop. She told them it didn't have to end like this. But it did. In the chaos, Linda was struck down first. Hannah's memory blurred, the sound of a crack, her mother's body collapsing near the van. Then Avon, her little brother. Silent, peaceful, like he was sleeping, but lifeless. I tried to hold them both, Hannah whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. But it was too late. David and Stephen continued their brutal fight, neither one willing to back down. The van was caught in the middle, shattered glass, crushed metal, the cave's walls closing in like a tomb. Hannah didn't know how long the fight lasted. She only knew when she looked up, both men were gone, one dead. One dying. Her mind screamed to run. To escape, and run she did. I left without looking back, Hannah said. I thought if I stayed, I'd be next. Or that someone else would hurt me. I ran into the night, into the desert, into nothing. She hugged her knees, rocking gently. I was ashamed, afraid. I thought no one would want me anymore. I thought I was alone. Karen's heart ached. You weren't alone. I know. That now? Hannah said, eyes meeting hers. But back then, I had no one. I disappeared. I changed my name. I learned to stay quiet. The years that followed were a blur of safe houses, shelter homes, and faces she barely remembered. A counselor called Lavra, a volunteer named Diane. They were angels who tried to piece her back together. But I never told them, Hannah said softly. Not about that night. Not about what really happened. Because who would believe me? Who would listen? Her voice broke, the weight of decades pressing on her like the desert sun. Karen reached out, clasping Hannah's hand tightly. You're safe now, she said, voice steady. We're going to find out the whole truth, together. Hannah nodded, but her eyes flickered with something deeper. Fear, shame, guilt. I'm not sure I can face it yet, she whispered. But I want to. Karen's mind raced as she pieced together what she'd just heard. The family tragedy had been layered with lies and silence. David's jealousy and paranoia had poisoned everything. Linda's secret had sparked a violent end, but the biggest shock was the survival of Hannah, the girl everyone had mourned in silence. Outside, the desert sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the trees. The past had clawed its way into the present, refusing to stay buried. Karen promised herself that the next steps would be careful, measured. Hannah's story was only the beginning. There were still unanswered questions. Who helped Hannah survive? Who covered up the truth? And what had been done to keep her silent all these years? That night, Karen reviewed the letters again, Linda's desperate scribbles, her pleas, her hidden fear. She read one last note that chilled her to the bone. If I don't make it back, promise me you'll keep looking. For the kids, for the truth, for all of us. Karen looked over at Hannah, asleep for the first time in years. The girl was still fragile, but something in her had begun to heal. Tomorrow, Karen thought, they would start to unravel the shadows. The van sat in a sterile evidence bay, its sun-bleached metal stark against the cold gray floor. Investigators moved carefully, like archaeologists uncovering a fragile relic. Every shattered glass shard, every bent panel held secrets waiting to be read. Karen stood quietly behind the yellow tape, watching as the forensic team began their work anew. Months, years of cold files and unanswered questions had led them here back to where it had all ended. Detective Salgado held up a laminated photograph of the back window, the place where the chilling message had been found. Not all of us died here. The red letters smeared across the dusty glass seemed both desperate and defiant. Dr. Lillian Graves, a specialist in blood spatter analysis, crouched beside the van's rear door, peering closely at the uneven stains. This tells us a story, she said softly. Linda was injured here. The blood pattern shows she was alive when she wrote the message. The spatter aligns with her dominant hand. Karen swallowed, eyes fixed on the image. She felt the weight of Linda's last moments, the courage to leave a message, even as death approached. Dr. Graves continued. The angle and pressure of the writing indicate she was struggling. The blood smears suggest she was fading fast but determined to communicate something important. Outside, The Arizona sun climbed higher, but inside the bay, time felt suspended. Karen imagined Linda's trembling hand, the exhaustion beneath. Her eyes, the will to reach out across the void. The van's interior was a mess of dust, broken glass, and shattered hope. Faded children's toys lay forgotten among the wreckage. The faded scent of pine from the cliffs lingered faintly in the air. Karen ran her hand over a cracked window pane, tracing the jagged edges like a silent prayer. Later, Karen arranged a private memorial in the shadow of the red cliffs near the Pima Canyon trailhead. A small group gathered, investigators, a few close friends, and the woman who had survived, Hannah. There was no media, no cameras. No flashing lights. Just quiet. Karen stood before the group, holding a folded letter, Linda's final words, and spoke with a voice that trembled but held steady. Linda Walker wanted to leave a message that even in darkness, there is hope, that the truth matters, and that those we love, even when lost, are never truly gone. She glanced at Hannah, who stood at the edge of the crowd, hands clasped tightly in front of her. After the memorial, reporters swarmed, hungry for answers. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. Karen shook her head firmly. No interviews. Hannah's voice was calm, resolute when she spoke to the gathered press. Please, let the silence speak now. Her words were unexpected, powerful. In the weeks that followed, investigators combed through every detail anew, the placement of each bloodstain, the location of broken glass, the angle of the letters. Forensic reconstructions painted a picture of a final, desperate fight, one where Linda clung to life long enough to warn the world. David and Stephen's violent confrontation had claimed lives. But Linda's last act was defiance. Karen kept the letters close, reading and rereading. Each word a heartbeat from a woman caught between fear and hope. She thought of Hannah, strong yet fragile, carrying the weight of those lost years, and whispered to herself, we'll find the rest of the truth. The desert never forgets. Beneath the relentless Arizona sun and the shifting sands, stories lie buried, silent witnesses to lives broken and forgotten. The Walker family's story, once swallowed by years of dust and silence, finally surfaced in fragments, unearthed by a drone's eye and pieced together by the tireless hands of those who refused to let the past fade away. The van remained sealed in a government warehouse, its shattered windows forever marked with Linda's desperate message. Not all of us died here. The words linger, a haunting echo of hope and sorrow. For the outside world, the case quietly slipped back into the shadows. The news cameras packed away. The headlines faded, but for Karen and Hannah, the story was never over. Karen stood once more near the cliffs of Pima Canyon, feeling the weight of decades pressing down with the dry desert wind. This place held memories of love and loss, of betrayal and bravery. The red rocks seemed to pulse with the silent grief of those who never left. Beside her, Hannah watched, eyes distant but steady, no longer the frightened girl who fled into the wilderness, but a woman scarred and strong. There's no easy closure, Karen whispered. Hannah nodded. Some wounds don't heal, not fully, but silence. Silence is worse. Together they walked the trail once more, their footsteps light on the gravel. Carrying the heavy burden of truth, the cave itself, a place of darkness and death, was sealed off, left untouched except for the faint traces of what had happened inside. Investigators had gathered all they could, but some secrets stayed buried, guarded by the desert's vast, indifferent silence. In the end, the drone's footage was a spark igniting a long-dormant search, a quiet reckoning. It reminded the world that sometimes the truth waits, patient and unyielding, beneath layers of dust and time. Karen thought of Linda, writing those last words in blood and fear, a message meant to pierce the darkness. She thought of David and Stephen, whose rage had torn a family apart, and most of all, she thought of Hannah, who had survived the unthinkable. Carrying the weight of secrets in her heart for so long, the media no longer clamored for answers. The crowds had gone home, but Karen and Hannah knew the story was theirs to hold, now a fragile, painful truth that would echo quietly through the years. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the canyon. Karen reached out and took Hannah's hand. Not all of us died here, she said softly. Hannah squeezed her hand back. No, she said. Some of us keep walking.